Don't you think it's rather unwise to continue this philanthropic enterprise? This inquirer that's costing you $1 million a year?
You're right, Mr. Thatcher. I did lose $1 million last year. I expect to lose $1 million this year. I expect to lose $1 million next year. You know, Mr. Thatcher, at the rate of $1 million a year, I'll have to close this place in 60 years.
Humans love to wonder, and when we wonder, we ask questions. In a search for an answer to these questions, we have argued and fought for centuries, especially over ones like which system is superior or whose God is real. As we evolved, we gave up on killing each other over questions none of us could answer and moved on to questions that were equally groundbreaking, just not as violent. Were Ross and Rachel on a break? Who's the greatest boxer of all time? Who is better, LeBron or Michael Jordan? While I know for a fact that the answer to the last question is LeBron James, these types of questions are inherently unanswerable. And among these questions is the question of the greatest film ever made. Over the next few weeks, we will be discussing that exact question as I review films that are often mentioned in the debate about the greatest films of all time. It is really not possible for me to objectively declare a film the greatest, and it would not really serve us any purpose. Yes, it's fun to debate such questions, but the variables that go into declaring a film the greatest are far too many. What we can do is discuss a film's cleverness, its importance in film history, and how it impacted the world around us. And that is exactly what we're going to do today, with Citizen Kane. Before we start though, I want to thank every one of you who has been supporting this channel, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you're new to this channel, however, make sure that you like this video and subscribe to this channel to not only join our community, but also watch more videos of me breaking down and analyzing movies. Let's jump right back into Citizen Kane. Orson Welles made this film when he was only 25 years old, and this film was made with a lot of ambition and fresh ideas. In the 1930s, Orson Welles was working in directing dramas at the Mercury Theatre Company and caught the attention of Hollywood when his narration of the War of the Worlds allegedly caused panic to unaware radio listeners. I mean, you can't really blame them because if you lived in the 1930s and heard a guy over the radio talking about an alien invasion, you would have freaked out too. It's important to note that some people dispute the scale of this panic, but nonetheless, it made headlines. Those headlines led the Hollywood studios to come knocking on Orson's door, and among them was RKO, one of the most prominent studios of their time. They signed Orson to a 3-movie deal and gave him complete creative control, which was odd at the time, but that decision changed all of film history. You see, the evolution of cinema has been a relatively gradual process, as each film brings something new to the table, moving the needle of cinema forward. Films like Citizen Kane, however, make it seem like cinema skipped an entire decade of that evolution almost overnight. The radical ideas it had have become so mainstream that you would not even notice them. But I happen to believe that the fact that the medium still imitates the style of Citizen Kane some 70 years later is proof of the film's greatness. I know what you might be thinking. If the movie is so great, how did it flop upon its release? How do you explain that, brown critic? Well, you're right. The movie did flop upon its release, but that's partly because of the controversy surrounding the plot of the film. The film starts with a montage of Charles Foster Kane's massive mansion called Xanadu, and that montage leads up to his deathbed where he utters his last words. We are shown a newsreel that gives us an outline of Kane's life, a wealthy newspaper magnate. Orson cuts to show us the people producing that newsreel, and we follow one of them as he tries to uncover the meaning behind Kane's last words. That outline of his life is filled with details through flashbacks during interviews with Kane's second wife Susan Alexander, his friend and fellow reporter Jedediah Leland, his business manager Mr. Bernstein, and the journal of the late Walter Parks Thatcher, the wealthy banker who served as Kane's guardian. In the last sequence of shots in the film, we learn that Rosebud references the sled Kane had as a kid before he was separated from his family and sent to a boarding school with Mr. Thatcher. The film could have been a story about loss of childhood or the complications of power and wealth, but a real-life newspaper tycoon by the name of William Hearst took it as a personal attack, as there were many parallels. When you own a lot of newspapers and are a powerful, wealthy figure, you get to have your way with a lot of things. RKO planned on showing the film at the Radio City Music Hall in New York, but were refused by the venue. The film was going to have to wait a couple of months before it could be properly released. It just happened to be that Orson Welles and William Hearst were in an elevator together the night of the premiere of the film, and when Orson asked him if he was going to come, Hearst gave him a simple no, and Orson Welles took that opportunity to land yet another jab on Hearst, saying that Kane would have attended, and he would later explain in an interview that it was because the character of Kane had more class and grace than Mr. Hearst. Yikes. The film was released again later and found massive success, because it wasn't just a film that was pushed into drama, and neither was it just a film based around a simple plot. It was one of the most technically superior films Hollywood had ever produced, and those experiments still hold up today. I'm not sure Orson deserves all of the credit for that, however, because most of it was work by Greg Toland, the film's cinematographer. Orson's team consisted of his friends from the Mercury Theatre Company and a lot of other outsiders of Hollywood. Greg, who had been working in the film industry, saw this as a perfect opportunity to be able to experiment and innovate in his work. The first time he met Orson, Greg told him that he wanted to work with him because Orson didn't know much about movies. He meant that Orson did not know about the conventions of Hollywood, and Greg would have freedom over how he shot the film. And Greg did make use of that freedom. He helped pioneer the use of deep focus, a technique where everything in the shot is in focus. While these techniques had been used before, Citizen Kane showed Hollywood how to properly use them, to immerse an audience into the world that the film is trying to portray. The use of deep focus allowed Orson to be able to use and apply a series of other techniques. For example, this scene of Kane playing in the snow that moves out to show his parents discussing his future is one of the most prominent examples of film blocking. What is film blocking? Film blocking is basically when a director tries to guide your eye around the scene using dialogue and movement instead of using focus for that. This is where Orson and his team could shine, as this helped them showcase the skills they had honed in theatre. This scene is pretty important to cinema history, as this deep focus and blocking is used to effectively create a metaphor. We open on Kane playing in the snow, unaware of what is about to happen, and immersed in his innocence. The camera pans out to show his parents and the banker discussing his future, but Orson decides to keep Kane in the background. He is now a small figure, as he has no say in the discussion and is a hostage to circumstances. His mother and the banker take up the most space in the shot, as they happen to be the people in power here. This deep focus also allowed Orson to use perspective to surprise you. In this scene, we see a normal looking background, but as Kane walks towards it, he is dwarfed by the large windows. It could be nothing at all, or it could be something that serves as a metaphor. Kane has shrunken to his environment as he loses control of his business and his life. Deep focus was not the only visual effect that Orson used. He would often blend mad drawings with physical sets to make everything more immersive. This is exactly how the opening montage were created and how we were able to see the large audiences during Kane's speech. These scenes are actually two different images, oftentimes a real image and a matte painting, which had been stitched together by optical printers. This innovation stemmed from limitation in budget, but it paved the way for far more developed technologies in film. He also used other effects such as this transition to show the reaction of the opera team to the singing of Kane's wife, which was much harder to achieve and nowhere near as easy as this transition I just dropped. Citizen Kane is in effect built on a simple plot. However, the innovation and techniques have added layers to the film and our understanding of it. It's not just a story about a newspaper tycoon, but rather a story about a driven, powerful jerk who wants to be loved by everyone else. While it's harder to relate to someone who lives in a mansion, it's much easier to relate to that story, or to the flaws and characteristics of Kane's wife and his friends. The sled being shown at the end was thought of as just another gimmick, but our understanding developed as we see the film dropping hints about loss of childhood. Kane's childhood and innocence were stolen from him, and he tries to drown out his feelings in material objects and tries to live through his wife's youth, telling her at one point, "We are going to be a great opera star." Doing that, of course, is not the most effective strategy. But is this movie great because it gave us all an important lesson? Not really. This movie's greatness is in the fact that we are still talking about its brilliance 70 years later, and the fact that it has held up over time, narratively, historically, and technically. In conclusion, I don't think I'm going to call this film the greatest of all time. I haven't seen nearly enough films to say that. But I am going to say that the film is a very interesting example of how limitations can be turned into innovation and what wonders can be created when artists are given independence in their work.
If you could have found out what that rosebud meant, I bet that would have explained everything.
No, I don't think so. No. Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or something he lost. Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything. I don't think any word can explain a man's life. No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. A missing piece.
Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and comment what you think is the greatest movie of all time and why. If you aren't subscribed, please do, as we have more of these videos coming up. In our next episode, we discuss The Godfather, so if you're interested in that, press the bell icon to get notified, and I hope you visit this channel again.